there is some stuff from earlier on this week, a few things happening. So, cross-faction endgame, right? What happens when your friends are Horde, but you want to play with them? Oh, you can't. That's not really ideal if, WoW's populations went down a little bit, some guilds have fallen apart. The more we open these things up, the more potential players you will have. Like if WoW overall, I mean, it isn't, but if WoW was overall like 50-50 Alliance Horde, but the Alliance only play with the Alliance, the Horde only play with the Horde, but then you then remove that barrier, well, suddenly a lot more people can play with a lot more people. So, yeah, this is some tweets. I believe you actually, is my tweet there? Or no, it was maybe another thread I replied to. So this is from Ian Hazakostas. Now, there is a little bit of context here that even involves Mike Ybarra, who was just saying that, it's like Ian and the team that are doing stuff, and he's kind of like, just listening as a player. He's, of course, the co-lead of Blizz, so it's a bit more than that, but yeah. Now, regarding Covenants, Ian said that we should have been clear in the wording. The rationale wasn't because lore, but rather because the storylines have now converged. The difference in week-to-week experience based on Covenant is much smaller, so now the balance, tips in the favor of flexibility. He says that lore and story, fantasy are extremely important, but it's ideal if they align with gameplay. But if story considerations alone are dictating frustrating mechanics, there's a conflict that we need to resolve in the favor of gameplay, which I honestly think is quite funny because the whole Covenant thing is a great example of them not resolving the conflict in favor of gameplay. Even when the story actually would have supported either way of doing it, because the Covenants, funny enough, are literally all allies and have been since the start. Yeah. So, I honestly, I think Ian's dead wrong on Covenants. I think he has been in all the interviews that he's done, and I just literally disagree. And that's that. Fair enough if the WoW team don't want to change. All I would say is do that, or didn't want to change. All I would say is, you obviously did that at your own peril, and I think we all know how that ended up in reality.
Yep, it's a thing where I can completely I can see the logic behind, we don't want people to swap in Covenants here and there whenever they're trying to go through a linear Covenant campaign. But again, falls under the same problem, I think, where it's within the box. It is like within the concept of this world where you pick a Covenant and that's a Covenant you do, and that's what grants you the mechanical abilities, then that justification makes sense. But then you think outside the box.
The problem is the premise.
Yeah, so you think outside the box and go, well, what if the mechanical stuff was, divorced from the aesthetic choice and the lore in the story? Then you don't have a problem. So it's like good enough defense, shows how they're thinking, but still not quite. Yeah. Not quite. Should have pulled the ripcord a year ago.
Now, a bit of good came out of this, though, because Ian also said, somebody here said, does that apply to cross-faction gameplay as well? Ian, it does. Alone is the key word above. There's more to the faction divide than just narrative. There's no quick solution here, but especially when it comes to equal access to endgame systems like M+ and raiding, that barrier is a major issue we know we need to address. So that very much is Ian saying, we, the WoW team, know that this whole faction barrier thing is a problem we need to resolve. So I think they know that it's holding the game back. Now, I do think that WoW, very much Alliance versus Horde. This is where I'm in the losing side of the argument. I've always thought it should be Alliance versus Horde. That should be that. WoW should have way better world PvP. War mode needs to not be half-assed, needs content, needs support, and we need to really support Alliance versus Horde and have that be a core part of the fantasy. But I think that Battle for Azeroth completely ruined the idea of a faction conflict by literally not delivering the faction conflict and instead just having us do weird special forces shenanigans while we saw Sylvanas play with cosmic forces. We got that instead of a faction expansion, but they've done the whole marketing of a faction expansion, which kind of means we can't have one again because they'd be doing the same thing again. Just that, in terms of the Cliff Notes version, even though Battle for Azeroth was, anything but, in my head anyway, it was anything but a, core Alliance Horde faction war. I mean, the war fronts were that, but, where was the questing? Where was the questing, actually in the zones? The core story of the expansion, wasn't that. So
it's the point where
I would like that. I would like the split, but I will concede that it's probably in the overall interest of the game, to to weaken the Alliance versus Horde divide thing and take it in a different direction.
Yep. I mean, one thing they'll just because I'm thinking about it, for them to resolve the fact that they can't do a faction expansion again because everyone thinks the BFA is a faction expansion and they'll never try that again.
Yeah.
I think the solution there is because the better faction expansion, at least in a number of ways, was Cataclysm. Cataclysm was not a faction expansion in any capacity marketing wise, as far as I remember. It was Deathwing's here, he's wrecked the place, but all of the storylines that in the revamped zones were, full of Alliance and Horde tension because of the state of the world. So they could do that again, where maybe it would be a lot of content they would have to make because they'd have to tell the actual marketed story alongside. But it's the idea of if you have strong Alliance versus Horde undercurrents running through, as an example, the Light Invasion expansion, then
that's what I would want.
Yeah, then suddenly you've got a faction expansion that isn't just a faction expansion and also is kind of snuck in under the cover of an expansion that people will not go, get away from me. So I think that's probably the move, as well as solving any high-end gameplay concerns on the system level as opposed to the player experience of story level.
I mean, people see this when it goes to when we publish my class order halls video, but a resolution to this is to keep Alliance and Horde, but have player, reform the class order halls. The player is not the leader of the order hall. You don't deserve to be the leader of the order hall. You literally abandon them after Legion. Like it's as if Blizzard even forgot they put that in the game, and that canonically, as well as the Maulwalker, you're also the Huntsmaster or the High Lord or whatever. So we need to reform the order halls, but just have the player character be a very high-ranking member of that hall, much like how the Warrior of Light in Final Fantasy XIV is a member of the Scions of the Seventh Dawn, but Minfilia is the leader of that organization. They need to do that, and then via the framing of having the order halls exist, that means that there is a narrative way for cross-faction raiding because it does banding together for the greater good, and that's a way that does not have the negative connotations of something being called the mercenary system. Because for a lot of people, if they're playing a paladin, they don't want to engage in something called the mercenary system because it doesn't really fit who their character is. So anyway, it's good to know the Blizzard have, they're keeping tabs on this. Perhaps the next expansion will have a larger solution to this problem. So that's pretty cool.